Hello, and welcome to yet another completely unprofessional interview. Scott here, and this is the only tabletop RPG interview show where the host has a doctorate in gong farming from an accredited university. Today, we have a very special guest here. For those of you who are within the realm of the DCC sphere, may already recognize him right away. But for those of you who are not, I have the privilege and the honor of having James Pozenel with me today, author of such adventures as I had it here. There we go. In Kyridian of the Computarchs, Feyhard, and is also here to talk with us about his coming game, Netcrawl for Dungeon Crawl Classics. But welcome, James. I appreciate you coming.
Oh, man, Scott, thanks so much for having me. People don't know this, but we've already met at Gen Con. When was that? Was that 2019 or something?
No, oh God, not that long ago. This was actually just a couple of years ago, 2022.
Was
that
it?
was my very first Gen Con. And I would just like to tell those of you watching, the most wonderful thing about it was you were my introduction to my first Dungeon Crawl Classics game. That's at my first Gen Con.
Wow.
But the even more important, it was my son's, and both him and I were there. And my son, has a bit of anxiety. This was his first Gen Con, and of course, just completely overwhelmed. But your attention to him, and likewise other people within the game, but you absolutely made him so comfortable that in a short amount of time, he was eased into the game and playing like he wasn't in a giant football stadium with thousands of people. So you have my forever appreciation for that. And he is returning again this year with me when we head out for 2024's Gen Con, and he is excited. So looking forward to you seeing him again. The major difference you will see is that his hair is now probably as long as your beard. So he may look a little different, and I may look a little different as I may have put on an extra 20 pounds, but maybe that might be gone before we go. But anyways, I digress.
That's a great story. I'm so glad to hear. I mean, I knew you guys had a good time. I think I knew it was maybe your first time playing DCC. And that kind of how that all, and it was a tournament too. It was a lot of fun.
Oh God. Yeah, no, it was my first DCC Gen Con game. So I played DCC. I've been involved in the game for a long time. It is my absolute favorite fantasy role playing game, and but it's different, because you're at Gen Con and you're on a giant football field, and you're there's lights and flashing, and you see faces that you recognize, and you're just like, oh my God, there's so much shit going on. But the game was fantastic.
It was a great time.
Even though you didn't accept my bribe to win. But anywho, but again, thank you so much for coming on today. So we are here to talk about your coming game, Netcrawl. Yes, Netcrawl, just making sure. But before we do, I'd like to do a little thing for, both myself and also, the people watching, is if you would jump into the Wayback Machine with me and go back in time. And if you can give us a little insight as to what brought, little James into the world of role-playing games.
Yeah. Let's see. I want to say, and I really can't remember how I decided that I wanted a Dungeons and Dragons game. Mm-hmm. Either it was in like the JCPenney catalog or something like that. Like, it's like, I want this. And, and so that first thing that came was the box set, the Moldvay box set with the Errol Otis cover and the dice. So kind of like early mid 80s was my first, and so that would make me at that point like 11 or 12 or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe like 12, and so that quickly, next year I had to have the expert set, and the year after that, it was like then it was AD&D. So.
Mm-hmm.
And then you put them both together, and then you ignore all the rules because that's what you do. and and followed on by meeting some kids in junior high and playing like Gamma World.
Nice.
And so that's kind of my start in the hobby, is that kind of like 81, 82, 83 Moldvay kind of set time, and Gamma World too was a really big thing for me.
Wow. So it's interesting because just for shits and giggles, I did a little poll on Twitter just a while ago, and yeah, I know that's not its name, but so what? But
we're dead naming it. We're dead naming it until the end.
His mama called him Twitter, so I'm going to call him Twitter. Anyways, so it essentially asked, if Dungeons and Dragons wasn't your introduction to role playing games, what was it? And I kind of posited as if you grew up in the 70s, 80s, or 90s, just kind of had a cutoff point there, because after that it kind of just becomes it's 5e or whatever. Right. But there were so many details to that people's introduction, and a lot of it was, surprising enough, they jumped over Dungeons and Dragons, and Gamma World was their introduction. And it was interesting. I mean, mine was Dungeons and Dragons, but it's one of those kind of natural progressions. We did get into Gamma World after that. I think it was second edition. We weren't playing the first edition, but it's always interesting, in the early days of like, what brought you into it? Because, you think that, D&D is this all-encompassing thing that, this is your first stepping stone and it moves on, at least here in the States. Right. In the UK, it's different. But it was Gamma World just kept popping up, but the thing is, when I saw like Gamma World, you can almost go, okay, so you were a kid of the 80s.
Yeah.
And a close second, I'm going to tally all the votes here and throw it out there, but there was a lot of Shadowrun was their first introduction. I'm like, okay, so you're a kid of the 80s, 90s.
Right.
But that just boggled my mind. Like, Shadowrun? That was your introduction?
It's like, I'm
You're
sorry.
Still playing? You're still playing? No hate to the Shadowrun fans, because they know they deserve it. But it's okay. So anywho, so of course you had this introduction primarily with TSR, but during that time, was there any games that you moved outside of the TSR games that you played during that period?
Yeah, once I got out of high school, I was going to community college. I met some people, and they were playing Cyberpunk like 2020. So that was probably a pretty foundational like experience for me, and especially given kind of a lot of things about my history. I'm a computer guy. I wrote software for years and years. I'm now like a solution architect or a systems architect, designing microservices and APIs and all this other stuff, interactions between services. So it's something about that early experience. So it was like Cyberpunk 2020, I think the hardwired source book on top, and it was really loose. I mean, just like any gaming that kind of was back then, is like you weren't like in an adventure path, or there weren't a ton of adventures to play. You're just kind of like making up stuff and not necessarily Monty Hall, but it kind of got over the top, right? And so that was like the big jump outside of TSR with Cyberpunk.
Okay. So were you the kid that in some of the pages of Early Dungeon that had the coding aspect in it? Were you the kid that would take that and input it to see what would happen, or
no?
No, okay,
no,
wasn't that extreme yet?
No, not yet.
Okay, so we move forward a little bit. Is it safe to assume that did you happen to have, a lot of us, move on with education, careers, family. Did you happen to experience any downtime between those early days and, moving forward?
Yeah, kind of like on and off, after high school, and then played a lot. when I was in my late 20s and early 30s. So it was like World of Darkness and GURPS and what else? A little bit of 3.5, I think, towards the end. So yeah, and then I got married and had kids, and I took a pretty long hiatus. My wife didn't even know I played video game or played RPGs until relatively recently.
Well, I mean, that's not too bad keeping that a secret. That's not too bad, honey. We need to have a chat about something. It's about my past, and be like, oh my God, did you kill someone? No, I like RPGs. Yeah. Oh, dork.
And the kids, we could play with the kids. It'll be great.
Yeah. Oh, that's pretty much the same progression for me. There's a bit of downtime, education, marriage, and kind of what jumped me back in was my son discovering it, when he was 10 or 11. And I've told this story a couple times, but we were at a softball game for my daughter, and he was off on a bench with a friend, and their heads were down looking over something. I'm like, okay, he's busy. Game was over. He comes up to me. He has a sheet of paper. He runs up to me and says, "Look at what I made." I'm like, "What you made? What is this?" Look at it, and it's a 5th edition character sheet. And wow. He's like Dungeons and Dragons. I'm like, "Oh." He's like, "Do you know anything about this?" I'm like, "Son, let's take a walk." And then soon thereafter, much to my wife's chagrin, stuff started showing up in the mail, and I'm like, "Oh no, it's for Noah. It's not for me. I swear to God." Oh, yeah. And I just kind of skyrocketed back into it. So excellent. So let's move forward a little bit more, and let's see if you would like to give us a little insight as to I know you from Dungeon Crawl Classics primarily, and as do other people, and you've done you've made several games for them. I believe that you you host games at conventions for them. You seem to know everyone there. You're one of the ones I would consider like the inside crew. You've established yourself with them, but before that occurred, what was your introduction and your progression into Dungeon Crawl Classics, and then likewise further into Goodman Games?
Yeah. So at work, I was a software developer at this point, a senior software developer and that kind of stuff. And somebody on a lark, was like, "We should play D&D." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, let's give it a whirl." And so as the game master, we were playing 3.5 D&D. And held that campaign for like a number of years. And it was just a lunch gig that we would play for an hour, and we would play 3.5. And then of anybody who, plays that, milieu of game soon realizes that it's just an armorer and weaponsmith, competition. Right. Between the game master and the players, right?
Right.
The players are building characters to break your game, and the game master is just trying to keep up. Right. And so at one point I was just like, "We're done," and I said, "We're playing DCC."
Oh, okay.
So it's the end. But before that kind of moment happened, I was like, well, I was running a campaign. And kind of like, this is starting to like wear on my nerves as kind of a thing to do. And then I was really wanted to find a system that, spoke to me or spoke, I didn't want to necessarily go like, "Oh, here's my basic set, D&D, let's play that." I don't think that ever even entered into my head at the time. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, well, let me look around. Like, all these systems are out, and so Adventure Conquer King. I was looking at that, and there's really some local people, some friends who were playing some of these other games, and so that was one of them. And then someone was like, "DCC, you should check that out." And I read that, and it's a revelation. You're just kind of like, wow, this thing is rules light, but just has a bunch of content that can be mined to make rulings, right? Mm-hmm. So, like, there's not specific rules on drowning, but there is a monster that will drown people, right?
Right.
And so you're like, oh, wait, I can just use that in this other situation. And so you're all just, all of a sudden you're just kind of looking at this entire corpus of rules or corpus of work as kind of like I don't know, some sort of workbook or something that can always be leveraged in lots of different situations.
Absolutely.
And it's brilliant, and that's why it's really brilliant. And then added on to that are all the extras that they kind of brought into it, right? So spells are rolled on a table, and weird stuff can happen, and there's spell duels, and there's the mighty deed mechanic. It's like every fighter has every feat. You just say what you want to do and roll the dice. And so all those things just like boiled this really complex, that 3.5 kind of mentality into something that is just really sleek and usable at the table. And still, it is based on that system, right? I mean, it is a die 20 system that is, a really sleek and slick version of those rules, and they're fun.
Oh God, yes. Yeah, no, it is likewise a revelation. I didn't discover it until after its inception, but after introducing my son to 5th edition and kind of like we played through that for a while, the natural thing occurred with him because he's like, well, I really like RPGs. And for people who aren't just like, well, I just like, playing 5th edition and I'm happy and I'm not interested in anything else, his natural curiosity led elsewhere, and likewise me, because all of a sudden it was one of those things where it's like, oh, it hadn't occurred to me in such a long time. I'm like, oh, I'm in a position where, I could not only play other things and discover things, but I can also discover things from the past that I never got to play, and possibly introduce my son to that. And then I made good friends with my buddy at the local convention who owned a game store, and things just kind of went from there. And then made friends with people online, during the lockdown. And now it's just like, everything's just like open up. But when I started looking for something, I'm like, okay, well, maybe there's something, because 5th edition never really clicked with me.
Right.
I enjoyed it. It was fun and it was great for him, but it's just something felt, missing, right? That stupid nostalgia factor that you're like, this isn't really, I remember it kind of being like that, but just not the same. Different. And then I discovered Dungeon Crawl Classics, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, this feels familiar but new. And I was so excited, and I started going, well, this is what we should play. Noah, grab your friends. We're going to test this out, and we're going to play it. And he's like, no, because, he's a kid. And he's like, I want to play 5th edition right now, and I'm not ready to change. I'm like, fine. But then I got together with some people at, some strangers at my friend's game store. Said, if you know someone, I'm going to run a funnel and just see how this plays out. And it was just a revelation, just an absolute blast. And it was like, this is kind of how I remember it, but it's so much cooler. Yeah. And one of the things that I liked about the DCC core rule book was, there are rules in there, but whereas, my primary was, AD&D 1st edition and the 2nd edition, whereas, even more so with 1st edition, where the rules seem like, hey, these are the rules, do not deviate from this.
Right.
DCC, it's like, here's a bunch of rules, but it just made me feel like, but if you don't want to use it, it's no big deal. That's how I felt. Yeah. And, reading through that, I'm like, okay, I don't feel tied down like I kind of did with, even though we did just fuck off the rules, but that I didn't feel guilty doing it. I didn't, whereas I felt, Gary Gygax was going to come scold me. Joe Goodman wasn't going to take the time because he's like, do what you want. But
you bought the rules, you do it with what you want.
Right. So you've discovered this game. And, again, as you said, it's a revelation. It's obviously endeared itself to you. What was the progression then from just enjoying DCC then to essentially going, well, I want to make something for it, and then likewise becoming more involved with the people at Goodman Games themselves?
Yeah, it was instantaneous. Oh. As soon as I read the book, I was like, I'm right. I got to write something for this, or not just like I got to write something, but it was like all in service of running the game, right? Because I think this is really, and this is like 2000. 15, 16 is when I found DCC. So a couple, 3-4 years after it had been published, I found it.
Right.
And some of the genius of the book is they just kind of, the adventures leave places undefined and evocative, mysteries like off to the side inside these adventures, right? And then you're left to like, they have the snake horn from Portal Under the Stars, and it's attached to some crazy demon snake. What does it do? There's no rules for that, right?
Right.
So now you have to make something in order for the players to use it. And so as soon as that happened, I was like, I'm ready. And then the other, side to all this is the community itself of DCC was writing and publishing stuff all the time on G+, and then putting stuff together in the Gone Farmer's Almanac. So they actually were like this way to just kind of start publishing and throw your stuff into the pile and have other people see it, right? Maybe they won't use it. Maybe they've already made it their own thing for that. But there was no barrier to participating in the conversation of kind of developing DCC or adding to DCC. Yeah. No, I've
often equated, people talk about various tabletop, role-playing game corners, fandoms and whatnot. You've got, your World of Darkness fans, your, OSR fans and so on. And, they tend to evoke a type of personality or stereotype, so to speak. And I always equated, the fans and the people who produce, work, play, enjoy, and support DCC as, they're the deadheads of the role-playing game community. They're open to everyone. They accept everyone. They're cool and chill, but they can be very excitable and rambunctious and just have a great old time. And much like how it's a very open third-party community, much like the Grateful Dead, it's just like, hey, man, just if you've got a mic and a tape deck, come in and record the show and sell it. We don't give a shit. Right. I know it's a little bit more. There's a little bit more guidelines with Goodman Games, but still, it's kind of like, hey, you have an idea, throw it our way. If you follow these steps, boom, it's yours to put out and for people to enjoy.
Yeah.
And and I kind of get some people going, You're right. They are kind of like that. I'm like, well, certain people of a certain age, I go to a teenager. Hey, they're just like the Grateful Dead. They're like, is that a BDSM rock band or so? I don't like. Oh, never mind. But yeah, so it's my experience with them, because when they before lockdown they had a booth there at Strategicon. I live in Los Angeles, or not Los Angeles, but I live near Los Angeles.
Right.
And that's the only con we get. But thankfully, it's 3 times a year, and I try to make it at least once, hopefully twice. But they had a booth there, and I was like a kid in a candy shop. I'm like, because my first time there, I'm like, oh my God, Dungeon Crawl Classics is here, Goodman Games is here, they're representing, and I was just like, so I went over there, and it's just like, there goes my budget. I'll take this, and then they had. They had a box set of Purple Planet there, and I'm hovering around it. I'm like, I don't know, and like I forget who was hosting the booth there, but I believe he said, you know what, this is the last one in stock.
Wow,
you might want to take it. So I'm like, yoink. Wow. And so whether it was true or not, I say, as if it's a tall tale. Sit down, children. Let me tell you the story of how I'm the one who holds the last Purple Planet in existence.
Nice.
And whether it's true or not, I don't care. But no, I was able to grab that. But then, stuff happens. I know representing at various cons, can be cost prohibitive, a lot of things, and they went away. But my next experience with them was when I visited Gen Con. Of course, that's different.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just, and then making those steps, down into Lucas Oil Stadium, and just, seeing just like tables and tables of tables who are just there to enjoy the same game.
Yeah.
And you see familiar faces, and you're like, oh, wow, the creators are joining in and playing these games. They're not just, a figurehead standing at a booth. and it was just amazing and wonderful, and I look forward to experiencing it again. And they've also returned to Strategicon, which was great, but likewise horrible for my budget. I'm like, oh, I guess I'm buying stuff again.
Yes.
But so
you're saving,
so the community,
you're saving on shipping.
That's my excuse. It's
Yes.
like when my wife comes home and says, "Well, we're saving money because it was on sale." It's, so I get to use that.
Legit.
But so the community is fantastic and very open, and so you've been inspired. You've written these games. You've submitted it to Gong Farmer's Almanac. I assume something gets published within the pages of those books, and then you start creating individual third-party content. So I'm interested in, as we go to talk about this just for a little bit, if you have a little insight, it's like, what is the basic guidelines? I assume there is some, but if there's a bit of, just for people who might be interested and they want to, I know they can contact Goodman Games or follow this, but just for those people watching who just might be curious, what is the general process that you go through to get these games, and then suddenly you see them on Goodman Games' website?
It is surprisingly low bar experience. Mm-hmm. I think basically they have the license that's kind of on the website, basically saying like, do whatever you want, and just drop us an email, basically. So it's like info@goodmangames.com.
Okay.
And then you just send like, hey, I'm doing this thing. Maybe like a short pitch or something. Like I'm going to write, I think I did. Well, I started writing, getting paid or whatever, for a third party publisher. But when I decided to do my own thing, I said, I'm going to write this adventure, and it's going to be, it was a duet. So one person, one game master, and it's called this, and whatever. And I think maybe I submitted like the whole finished adventure to Goodman Games, and they're like, okay, good. Like that was it. Looks great.
Oh, okay.
So you're thinking like it's going to be some sort of process, and it's not. It's basically awesome. how it works. I think the only things like that Joseph gets squeamish about is like intense like sexual stuff, or like any nudity. That's his kind of like his personal boundary. Mm-hmm. And even then he'll kind of say like, you can still do that, but could you put something on the back of it saying like, this is intended for mature audiences, or something to that effect. He won't come down on a hammer even on that stuff. Okay. Right. Yeah. Like I think when we were making Angels, Daemons, and Beings Between, this was David Fisher's company, Shinobi 27 Games.
Okay.
When we were making that, we got back an image, and there was like a boob, and Joseph's like, that's not good or whatever, and and so they covered up the nipple, and that was and that passed. That was fine.
Yeah, and that's fine. I mean,
right.
The way I look at it is not necessarily, I don't see it as someone being prudish or any way. It's a personal, opinion on things.
Yeah.
But what's important is how people kind of express that. Obviously, Joseph said, maybe you don't. And to me, that's more endearing. Whereas if someone just said, hey, you know what, we are da-da-da-da-da-da, we don't use this here, and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh God, I maybe I'll go somewhere else. But
he has a fair point, right? It's like, this is a game, and it's a game that should be approachable for kids and young kids. Like you think about you and I's story. Our kids got into it at a young age, like 8, 9, 10 years old. Do you really want, pictures of that stuff like in the book? Probably not. I mean, it's going to happen, but do you want the game to be the conduit for that?
Exactly.
Material.
No, I get it. Exactly. And an approach that would be, is the art, necessary and representative of the game,
Right.
and at that point you can kind of maybe, have a bit of a discussion. But if it's just there because you're like, hey, I like boobs, this is, but, which is nothing wrong with that. But again, you have to go, well, you go with, Joseph's impression on that and just respect it, in my opinion. So,
Yeah.
and, I would assume that you never know, because people are people. There may have been a pushback at one point, but it's one of those things where, if you're decent, you can kind of get a general idea, like, oh, okay, I'm cool. We'll work through it, not throw a hissy fit about it. So, but all right, so we're going to get into Netcrawl here in just a second, but before we move on, anything else you would like to just discuss about your inception as you started to roll into Goodman Games?
I don't know if I got in at the right time or whatever. Or I was working hard at it at the right time, and I don't know what it's like for other folks, who kind of want to get closer to that, like you're talking about the inner circle. And I don't even feel like I'm in the inner circle half the time. I'm fortunate, right? I've gotten some stuff. I've done some freelance stuff for them,
Right.
and that in itself is kind of this interesting learning experience. As a DIY publisher, you're just publishing what you want to publish,
right?
And then as a freelancer, you're getting an assignment. I need this, and I need it by X day, and so it's a totally different style, and so if anyone's kind of wants to go that direction, then you really just have to kind of reconcile yourself, right, with it's a profession or it's a semi-professional thing where it's no longer about what you like, it's about what's being asked of you and performing as such. Mm-hmm. So, but it's been Absolutely. Really great experience. I got to write for Dying Earth.
I mean, hell yes.
How can you not say yes and be like super happy at the end of it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, even if, it's like you've never read a Dying Earth book, it's one of those things where if someone comes to you and says, hey, will you write for the DCC Dying Earth role-playing game? You're like, absolutely. And then as soon as you get off that phone or answer that email, you're like, I got to go read. You fake it till you make it. I know a lot of people whose introduction into, as far as the industry side of role-playing games, that's their story. They're like, hey, how much do you know about Flash Gordon? Right. Oh, I know everything about it. Great. Will you write for this role-playing game? Absolutely. Boom. Shit, I know nothing.
Purple Planet was one of those things too. Like I had read Barsoom, but they're like, do you want to write an adventure as your own publishing company for our Purple Planet reprint? And I'm like, absolutely, I do. And you're like, gosh, I need to really read a little bit more about in the Sword and Planet genre because I really don't know enough. Yeah. And I had never had Purple Planet. Like okay. You had the box set, I didn't. Yeah. And so I was like, all of a sudden I'm having to read like 4 or 5 adventures, the companion and all this other stuff just to kind of load it all in my head and make sense of it so I could write an adventure for it. Yeah. So you totally do those things.
Yeah. And since Purple Planet's a box set, it's not just, a few pages for good. No, there's a lot of material to rifle through. So, all right. So let's talk about Netcrawl. So a while back, you contacted me and said, hey, Scott, I'm working on something. Would you mind, taking a look at this? And, if you're interested, maybe sometime in the far, far future, we can get together and talk about some more. And of course, I said, absolutely. I'm here to, my primary thing is whenever I can try to assist anyone, with their creation, their work, whatever it may be. I tend to consider myself, even though I've never written or done anything within the hobby as of yet, I call myself, I'm a cheerleader.
Nice.
I'm here to try to elevate other people and say, go, go, go. Let's help you establish, what you're doing. Cause I mean, I'm 50. I'm not, I'm not 19 years old. I don't have this channel to try to get big on YouTube or make thousands of money or make a career out of it. It's just for the love of the game.
Right.
And so, I mean, it's nice if something comes from that, but it's not my primary focus. But I've met so many people over the years that, it's just nice seeing, whatever they're working on succeed. Maybe it's that parental aspect. And also I'm getting old in age and sympathetic, and I just want everyone to succeed and be nice. And when they die, they may thank me, because I know my children are going to thank mom when they graduate. And but anyway, so
that is nice, homie.
I know. So you sent me the Ashcan copy of Netcrawl, and right away I was in. And I'm gonna have you kind of give the details of it. But one of the things that interested me about it was, the aspect of what Netcrawl is, and how, just primarily it's like, okay, oh wow, this is DCC that exists within a virtual universe, but also it's something that can be utilized for other games, which suddenly hit me as like, oh wow, this is cool. Because one of the suggestions in there is like, hey, if you want to, beef up, if you're playing in a cyberpunkish type game and you want to beef up your Netcrawl or your hacking, or the virtual aspects of the world that they're going in, you can use this as almost kind of like a separate game. Yeah. Like a lot of times where, you may do, if you're in a long campaign and you'll do like a palate cleanser.
Yeah.
And then once in the palate cleanser, then you come back to your camp and like, oh, great, I'm ready to do this again.
Yeah.
And so I immediately said, my son and his friends are playing in Cyberpunk. We're gonna see if we can test this out. And the next time they do a net crawl, we'll try to play forth. And a little bit of time went by, and finally, because they're teenagers, they have high school and other stuff, and they don't play every week. I'm like, great. So are you guys ready to get back together and play Cyberpunk? I'm going to try this game out. They're like, we're playing Morkborg now. I'm like, fuck. So I apologize for not getting to that aspect, getting it to the table. But I have been, I did go through the Ashcan. You were very kind to send me a physical copy of it, and also an updated physical copy of the previous beta.
Yeah.
And just it's just one of those things where just like, this is a wonderful take with the DCC rules that moves away from the fantasy RPG, and just kind of shows that, that DCC is pliable in certain things, depending on how it's handled. So without me going, telling you, this is your game. How about you tell me and the people watching, what is Netcrawl? If you can give us a description of what the game is. And likewise, what was its genesis that led it to where it is today?
Yeah. So Netcrawl is, it says on the cover, it's a role-playing game about adventuring inside the world net, which is just like a cover story for the internet, right? And so,
right.
And I think where that kind of eventually, or part of it came from, is calling back to the cyberpunk days, in the early 90s, is you would have a net runner and they would have to, compromise the network or do something. And it was always the side thing that took up a bunch of time and was in essence like sidelines everybody else.
Yeah. Twiddling their thumbs. Yeah.
Everyone's like watching the net runner, make his rolls and run into ice, and like they're like, oh my God, he's gonna die, and all that kind of stuff. And there's nothing to do. And in fact, I've heard, and I've been, other people's experiences in this too, is like they would actually run those sessions separately. They'd get together on another night and they'd do the thing, and then they would do it at the tables, present kind of the outcome at the table. And so, and I think, and so that was always kind of in my head about like how unsatisfactory of a table experience that was, and not really ever seeing anybody tackle it. And so there was that. And then when I wrote the Enchiridion of the Computarchs, which was just me taking, in fact, I remember this is one of these moments where you go up to Joseph and you're like just scared to talk to him about it. Turns out it's a big nothing burger. But you go up and say, hey, I'm going to take all your spells in your book, your big book. I'm going to reskin them as programs, and then I'm going to publish it and make money. And he's like, fine.
Oh,
go ahead.
And again, I just see that like as a sitcom thing. Like, every single time you walk up, it's like, you're sweating, you're nervous, like, is this going to work? And every time it's like, fine. You're like, Okay. So, anyways,
it's almost got to the point where I just don't really bother to ask.
And that'll be the one time. That'll be the one time. He's like, hey, James, we need to have a chat.
Right.
All right. So carry on, please.
Yeah. I think if it's not if I'm not doing it, you go ahead. If I don't have any plans, have at. Because he just wants to see it grow. And so I reskinned all these programs, did the Kickstarter, got it out the door. And an innocuous question about like, hey, is there going to be a setting for this book? I'm like, no, never. Mm-hmm. And then I walk away from that interview a few months later. I'm like, wait a minute. Could there be a setting for this? Could I use this in a different game? And so here I am writing an RPG that I never wanted to write.
So this setting Netcrawl. What is it? How would you explain it? I hate the term, what's the elevator pitch?
Yeah.
But I mean, what's the elevator pitch?
Yeah. That's a fair statement. I still don't know exactly how to elevator pitch it. It's a game where, you go inside of a computer and you're trying to extract something from it. I think that's kind of like usually it's kind of the story that we use around computers in games, right? It's like it has something in it that I need in order to continue the adventure, right? Mm-hmm. And so typically that's a skill check. And this isn't. You just all go in. And so it's kind of like some element of Tron or Matrix, right? Where you are actually like in a virtual reality that has maybe its own set of rules or reflects, common, your common everyday experience. But it's a toolkit to do any of that, right? You can have it be Tron, you can have it be Matrix, you can have it be, I don't know, something crazy with its own physics or own set of rules, kind of like how everything should work. And I'm not purposely giving you a setting. I'm going to give you some kind of broad strokes and a lot of tables and tools to kind of roll on or to look at so that you can kind of fit it to what you want it to be. I think it's still, it can be a standalone game where there's just, this is the only reality, right? Like you're just in the Matrix and you're adventuring and you've got tons of stories and things to tell inside the Matrix. Or it could be a cyber sidecar, like that palette cleansing kind of moment where like you've been adventuring in Night City for like 2 years. And now it's like, let's get a break, right? Let's go inside, do something. It's adjacent, right? It's still, you're still cyberpunk characters or whatever, but now you're having like a nice long run in a totally different environment, different foes, different, stories to tell. And it kind of hit me as well. And I know this is the longest elevator pitch ever. It's like we're as a the human race or whatever in the digital age is kind of wrestling with a bunch of stories with our technological developments, AI and cell phones and engagement and virtual reality and all this stuff. And so, what stories do you want to tell about today? At your table.
Right. Yeah, because it's one of the things that it stands out is, and you did reference Tron, and whatnot, is it evokes that kind of the early days of what we all thought the internet was like, or what it was like even inside of a computer. Right. Like, we all know it's just ones and zeros now, especially if you work in the IT industry. It's like, nope, it's just a current. That's all it is. There's no little people inside the box, but it was great to envision it like that. And just, and there's nothing wrong with this, having this wonderful imagination of like, something is alive and breathing. And what you present here within these pages is an homage to that, because as you go through the book and you start reading into, more of the setting aspects of it and how you create it, it is kind of a bit of a twofold to it, because we may talk about this in more detail, but when you provide, the rules on how to create your adventure, you're using you're still using what I would call like the old school electronic schematics and mapping out what you're going through, but the world itself still has a physicality to it. It's different because, like you said, the net running aspect from the older versions of Cyberpunk could just grind a game to the halt as everyone waits. And the only one that I'm familiar with is the new version when they try to change that.
Yeah.
And it did work in keeping everyone on the same level.
Agreed.
But the actual aspect for the Netrunner, for me, mind you, is a bit boring. Because, all right, so all I'm doing is going up an elevator, stepping out, dealing with something, making a roll, going back in, and going up or down.
Yeah.
But I know why they did it.
Right. I mean, it aligns a lot closer to like a fantasy thief, right?
Yeah.
You've got these physical manifestations of things around you that you have to tweak with, right? You turn off a camera or, look for other devices or, whatever you're going to do inside that network.
Right.
But you're right. They they use this AR kind of mechanism, augmented reality kind of mechanism for the Netrunner. And they're manipulating all these devices while you're kind of in the adventure, doing stuff. And I like it. It makes sense. But to your point, it's not the same as the original idea of like Neuromancer or those kinds of books, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. And so immediately, I mean, that's what drew me in. I mean, it's like, okay, this is again, and to be fair, for those of you watching, I sound nostalgic, but that doesn't mean that it's hokey. The living, breathing world of Tron is current. There's another version that came out, or there's another movie that came out. As I don't know what your opinions of it was, and there's another one coming out. I believe there might be a series coming out, and so the idea that there's still this. Regardless of what we know to be true, maybe we don't know it's true, and there is a living, breathing world inside these computers. And to me, that's just as interesting as looking at, a map of Faerun and going, wow, what's that over there? I want to go see that.
Yeah.
And for some of the older but still younger than me generation, this also evokes a sense of the 3D animated series Reboot.
Right.
So it has all of that. So it's got various degrees it's going to touch upon. For me, it'll be Tron. For someone, it may be Reboot.
Yeah.
For someone else, it'll be The Matrix.
Yeah.
So the game itself is still using the foundation, of Dungeon Crawl Classics. But I guess my first question is you don't need the core book to run this, do you?
No, I think
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I hope that the finished product is you don't need the core book at all. Like there's enough in here that you could just play it without. Would having the core book be useful? Probably, but I don't think I'm going to go down the same track as like Weird Frontiers did and Evolved, which is kind of a newer superhero setting by Eric Bloat. Yeah. And basically have it all together. Now, am I going to spend like 50 pages telling you the basic rules of how to do RPGs and that kind of? No, I am not.
Right.
I think people can get that on their own.
Right.
Because there's just too much to put in here about, kind of like playing Netcrawl or being able to kind of utilize all these tools to get your game going. I don't want to spend a bunch of time telling you how to RPG.
Yeah, no, it's and you are one of a very select few that kind of may for lack of a term may have the privilege of having this and not having the requirement of where you don't get to have your own set of rules. This is the adventure, this is what you're doing, or this is the setting, but still you still need to use that, which is nice. I would still agree. I mean, even with Beatty's book. I would still technically recommend that you get DCC just because it's great. But the big difference between yours and Beatty's is yours is going to be a tiny bit smaller.
Yeah.
But
4 thick inch monster.
Oh God, yes, no.
Beautiful.
I'm glad he's got a new adventure out, and I think there's been enough time between him finally offloading that to where he can kind of breathe a little bit, because that was just a horrible experience for the most part, but still fantastic book. I know, but so that's kind of that's a plus, for those of you who may want to engage with this game. You don't necessarily need to go out and spend $29.95 for a for the paperback, or $50 or so for the hardback to run this game. Which is kind of nice, because that is a bit of a, almost like, you get to experience a brand new world, a brand new setting with some rules that utilize the DCC Foundation. And it may also allow you to taste test, the rules themselves, and go, oh, this is kind of neat. I might be interested in Mutant Crawl Classics or DCC. And likewise, someone may go, oh, this is neat. Not for me, but I didn't spend 60, 70, 80 bucks on a bunch of stuff, and I'm throwing it on eBay, which I know DCC is not for everyone. There's a lot of people who, and so this is no slight against any one of the games out there, but you can't make a game that's going to make everyone happy.
No.
So you have something different from the core mechanics of Dungeon Crawl Classics, and one of that is an ability called Hack, which for me personally, that's self-explanatory, but it states here that it is it's changing the code at the right moment can work to a character's advantage. So this is a special ability that applies exclusively to certain aspects within the world itself.
Yeah.
Is there anything besides that general description that that you can tell us about this that makes it different than some of the other than your standard Dungeon Crawl Classics abilities?
Well, I think it is a bit of a reskinning of luck.
Okay.
It is kind of like. You can spend that point of hack to change the system, upping a die roll, for instance, and that's very much a luck mechanic for sure.
Right.
And it's maybe a place to explore about like some more rules around it, and see if there's other ways to utilize it too. The other kind of side bit of hack is hacking, which kind of gets confusing. I mean, I'm still in development stage. This isn't like GA yet. And so hacking is this mechanic, and it's basically, if you have the Dying Earth set, it's the force of will kind of mechanic. Like the magician is able to like channel their psyche into this explosion of magical energy, and it shatters objects and damages people and all sorts of stuff. And so you can kind of do the same thing with hacking. It's like the same table or similar table, similar mechanics, similar die roll mechanics, in order to make these kind of like, I want to get through that wall or that firewall or whatever it is that's kind of in your way, or I want to explode the ice, and you can just kind of like, you're just kind of hacking it right there and making it go away. So I think there's some elements that are, that digress from DCC, but I think there's a lot of DCC DNA still inside.
Oh, absolutely. Because the next thing that I'm going to mention here is you've got quite a variety of skills that are within the game. And, they are associated with certain abilities, but, you have several, they kind of run the gamut. You've got security skills. Things such as breach security. You've got investigative skills, which is something, as far as I know, I'm not familiar with the entire library, but that's something relatively new. I mean, you don't see something like that within the game,
right?
But you've got specific, things such as data analysis, Intuit architecture, and that's not creating QuickBooks. It's something else, but it still uses the foundation of Dungeon Crawl Classics and whatnot. Yeah. But again, it's one of these necessary things that needs to exist within this particular setting that makes it more than just a car wrap of the DCC core rulebook. And it makes it stand out. And likewise, and I'm just going to point this out again. I know we talked about this further, but to me, this is a testament to Goodman Games.
Right.
Because, another publisher may have said, nope, these rules have to be touched upon. We don't deviate from them. You can rename them, but wait a minute. You want to add something to this? Oh, no. That's not us. It's now you, and you need to be, and so on. But again, it is a, it's a wonderful thing to be able to see that, especially with people who have that creative spark like you to make something different and make it your own.
Well, look at their work in general, right? If you like, there's the DCC book, right? And you could argue that MCC is pretty similar, like in basic concept, but then Lankmar is a lot different.
Oh yeah,
and these are all still Goodman Games products, and Dying Earth even more different, and the Empire of the East has some stuff in it too. So they kind of unchain even their own developers, right, of their own games, right, to like let them kind of explore what are the important mechanical elements for that setting. Just like the skills, I realized like everybody needs access to them. They don't necessarily need equal access, but everybody needs to have access to being able to, falsify their identity in a computer system or break into a computer system, because that's the setting.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what if you don't have these particular skills, what would you be doing jacking into this computer virtual reality?
Right.
It's there. And this is true in a lot of games. It's like, okay, well, we have a situation here that needs a thief in the real world of, real fantasy world. So where's our thief? Whereas here, it's the setting, standardizes the skill sets. Why would you go into this virtual reality if you didn't have the skills available to manipulate it?
Right.
And it makes perfect sense. But that doesn't mean, that, the different, these are just the base abilities, but that doesn't mean if you continue to read into this book that the classes, are, they're not, everyone is just the same. The classes do have their own special aspects to it outside of these standardized skills that makes for a variety of difference of, what they can provide within here. So you've got, you've got these basic skills within the game, which is, again, definitely a bit of a deviation from your standard DCC core rule set. Along with things such as code execution. Any character can attempt to execute a code, and a code is within the game. I'll let you just touch on that.
So it's kind of an amorphous concept. It could be like something that an entity itself, you could run the entity. Like, let's say you subdue it somehow. You don't kill it. You could like actually kind of run its script and find out information if that was an important element of the game or the adventure. It could be just like in a way like a scroll, like a bit of code or a script that's sitting there that could be evoked and ran and produces some sort of effect. And so those are like the two big ones, but I think there was another one in here too recently where because I just kind of had done this up relatively recently, and I can't find it because I'm dumb.
Oh, it's fine.
But
no, don't worry.
But yeah, it's just a way to provide characters a way to interact with the environment. Really, like there's code everywhere, and so now why not just like try to run a piece of wall code or run some sort of like object that's sitting there. Like it could be a puzzle, but to kind of get it going, you've got to be able to find where it executes from. So it's just a way to kind of give everybody a way to interact with all sorts of different kinds of really elements of the system.
Right. Very not unlike Flynn when he goes into the virtual world And as a user, he starts touching things, and things activate, things operate,
Yeah.
things heal, and and granted, he's doing it subconsciously,
Right.
but still, to be able to willfully manipulate it and whatnot, that's excellent, because again, you don't really have that in certain newer versions of cyberpunk games. Net running is just pretty much a means to an end.
Yeah.
I need to open this door. I'm going to throw a bit of something to kind of get your way, but that's it.
Yeah.
And we're going to move on. And mind you, that's many people's cup of tea, but some people want more.
Yeah.
And this is what's providing. So, and even with things such as logging in and logging off, you have a different aspect to that. You've created certain things as spoof credentials, false identities, and I like how when you say even if you log off the system or quit it, that may not end the encounter and may not stop the system or the ICE from seeking you out and finding you.
Yes.
So that's like, oh shit, and that's if you're using it as a means of of net running, so to speak, and not just existing in the virtual world. So
right.
now. Never fear. For those of you who love a funnel, there is a funnel aspect to the game called the gig, and again, it is interesting, but it does have the 0 level foundation. But these are considered 0 level programs, and like all 0 level characters, they're you want to see, okay, well, that's fine. Oh, wow. This is, there's always a various degree of cool aspects, normal things, and just humor involved. And
yes.
this one definitely does not fail in that. I love, you have chatbot in here.
Of course you do.
Oh God. Yes. So
packet sniffer. Like,
yeah,
what does
exactly.
that guy look like?
Process killer, just like, oh, okay, it's in Control Alt Delete.
And people run with that when you're like, you kind of hand off the pile of zeros, and they're like, I'm a web spider or something like that, a dark web spider, and like, well, I look like this, and they're like, they lean into these things,
Right. Yeah. So there's another aspect to the game called RAM. And RAM is associated with the various classes that you have in here, and depending on your class and your level, you have a certain amount of RAM at your disposal. And essentially, what is RAM used for? So
I think RAM is kind of semi-equivalent to encumbrance, but not exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So the casters have to have enough RAM. Mm-hmm. Like they have their spells and they have a lot, and they're allotted a fair amount of RAM. And as our warriors, because warriors are using lots of quote unquote equipment, right, which are called daemons, and daemons is just a word for a piece of code that performs a function over and over and over again. And it's kind of like solid, right? You can't really get inside it and mess with it. Although, of course, advanced programs, features, ICE and whatnot could break your daemons. But so everything kind of costs. So there is that encumbrance element of I want to have a minigun. Okay, well, that costs 10 RAM or whatever it costs. Mm-hmm. And so not everybody, you're not going to, and you've got to pay for armor, and you've got to pay for other equipment and other kind of computational advantages like programs and mod chips and scripts and all these other things. So it's a way to kind of give a limit to how much you can kind of carry with you when you're inside the net.
Okay. And that does increase with leveling up within the game. So. Yeah. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to go through. We're going to touch upon classes which for this game is called avatars, and appropriately so. So I'm going to give the name and a little bit of this description. But for those who may not be familiar with some of these terms, some of these things, if you might be able to provide what would be what would be the role playing analog, so to speak.
Yeah.
6-gun shooter would be, like a fighter or, someone who's, a elven archer, whatever the case may be. But, so first off, we have the Avatarist, which is also known as a pixel pusher, hollow artist, and believer.
Right. And so the analog here is a cleric, and they full-heartedly kind of believe in the virtual reality as maybe it's like this place of ascendancy of our souls and spirits and whatever, our future, right? And so they're really wrapped up in kind of the belief of the system and that it's this place to come to a higher self.
Okay.
And I think, that's kind of a common trope in this, right? It's the people who are just kind of like, and even like around us today, right? Yeah. People who are just like fervent believers in AR and VR and all these kinds of things. It's like, they're the believers. They believe in this stuff. And so that's who the avatarists are.
Okay. And I just want to add that each one of these classes, obviously have some of the standard things that, your Dungeon Crawl Classics classes have. They have their own crit tables to associate to. They have various degrees of action die they're going to use, and certain things like programs known. But the Avatarist does have a bit of features where they have things such as repattering, programmer, hollow die. And this will be like a 3-hour thing if we go into everything into detail. But just know that again these classes have their own analogs, but there's tools and utilities in here that make them different and their own thing within this game. So next up we have a Cyphomorph, which is also known as a Zoasynth, changeling, or native.
Yeah. So this is kind of like a takeoff of Tron's ISO kind of concept, right? In the second movie, these native programs of the net or whatever. That's what this is. This is the demi-human class. And it's a lot like the halfling in DCC. So they get to spend hack to help their teammates, and they can blow up stuff. They can execute programs. They have some skills. They get some skills that progress as they level up, so they improve over time, and most classes don't.
No, and I do love that, at least with this one, that you're giving some love and attention to the D7 for their hit dice.
Yes.
So
prepare yourself to have some D7s.
Yeah, you're going to need dice for this one, my friends.
Yes.
You definitely are. So next up, we have the Cybernaut, and this one kind of is self-explanatory because you have it. It's also known as the Wizard, Net Engineer. Oh, I apologize. My dogs are barking, everyone. So just, I'm at home. Wizard, Net Engineer, or Coder. Now, for me and other people, they're going to go, oh, immediately I know what this is. Yeah. But any other insight you'd like to provide for the Cybernaut?
They have the most kind of capability, right? They're going to be that wizard class in DCC. They can roll incredibly crazy results on the table, right? They can get those plus 32 results where the world ends. That's what they do.
Oh yeah, and their equivalent within the game is you have what's called burn down, which is their spell burn, equivalent. Next up we have Grifter. And again, this is interesting to me because this is also known as a snoop, intrusionist, or runner, and this kind of gave me a lot of the Johnny Mnemonic vibe, or a lot of the Neuromancer vibe, that this is just someone who's here to just manipulate people and get away with stuff, make some money or some cash, whatever the case may be. So a little bit more about this archetype.
This is the thief. You want to give. It feels like everyone should be the grifter at some level. If you think about like a cyberpunk game, is everyone's a grifter,
right?
But this is like all the skills. They're like, they know the ins and outs of manipulating the system. And they also have scripts, which is kind of like the magician class from DCC Dying Earth. So they get kind of like these one-shot Vankian magic spells, right? Usually not as powerful as a wizard because of the way they roll them up. So they don't really get into the deep in the upper levels of the table. It's just not possible. And so, they just have these kind of one-use, always available scripts that kind of run. And then they have all the thief skills, of course.
And and a lot of the familiar things, again, threat detection and removal, find traps, so to speak. So things like that. But again, made their own.
And there's three different kinds, which is kind of a DCC throwback to like the three alignments, right, of thieves. So you got kind of an assassin style. You've got like someone who's good at breaking and entering. You got another guy who's good at just manipulating data or looking at data. So and they all have their own specifications to that, which is again fantastic. Data savant, I can just see what that would look like in my head, and just like, all right. So then we have War Driver, also known as Jackbooter, again a term that I'd be familiar with, but others may not. But Savage or Heavy, which is a universal gaming term online. But this is the warrior class, so to speak. Okay. And their biggest thing is the mod chip. So
the mod die.
Yeah. So they chip in these pre-programmed functionality, and so and it's like DCC's deed die. But it's really specialized to a particular format. So like there might be one for like slashing weapons, or for unarmed combat, or for using, a rifle like a sniper, or all these kinds of different variations. And so like you get like a baseline benefit just by having it chipped in, which is something that fighters don't necessarily get. They get their lucky weapon, right?
Right.
But this is like, if you have this chip active, you get a +1 bonus to hit using that particular weapon type. So it's kind of like this extra kind of magic, kind of pluses kind of boosted into you when you're using the chip. And then you still roll a deed die, or a mod die in this case, and better things can happen, right? More stuff can happen when you're using that one particular attack. So I like kind of where that went. It went through a lot of iterations of design to kind of get to where it is, including like some levels of mod chips where you have to be a certain level before you can actually chip in a really advanced version of a mod chip. And I kind of like where this is all landed, and how maybe it's a little crunchy, but I think it gives fighters a lot of options at the table. They have to kind of strategize about what they're going to do, what chip's going to be active right now during this round, because they can kind of switch between whichever active slots they have, but they can't, use them both at once.
Okay. Excellent. There's the constant pining of, how can we make the fighter class, quote unquote, more interesting? Yeah. And, because there's two types of people out there. People who you can just give them, here's your sword and shield, and they're as happy as they can be. Right. And there's people who just look at a fighter and go, that's as vanilla as anything is ever, and I have no interest in it. And because they want the super splashy with everything. Yeah. And sometimes people do a great job, with it. Other times they make him indestructible weapons of power. Yeah. And others just kind of like, oh, well, it's just the same. He's wearing a new hat.
Yeah. I swing my sword.
Right. Exactly.
Every round.
Yeah. And again, people love that. I love them for that.
Yes.
And, but if others want more, again, each to their own.
There's some fiddliness here, and I think that'll make it just go ahead. Make it a little more interesting if you like that kind of class and you like mixing it up with that kind of class.
Exactly. It's just enough crunch because the crunch isn't within the game, it's with your character.
Yeah.
So you're only having to focus on these particular aspects and not worry about the core rules of the game.
Yeah.
So it makes it easier to focus upon. Whereas if the game is crunchy and you're crunchy and everyone's crunchy, and if you're not into crunch, then you're just like, I'm checked out. So we got daemons, which is as what you described. That is essentially your equipment within the game. And again, it's got to have that cyberpunk aesthetic. So dealing with melee daemons, first and foremost, we've got the banhammer,
yes,
which exists, and then we continue on. We have the ice pick, and ice in capital letters.
Yes.
But then you've also carried on the tradition of, in a lot of the cyberpunk games, with Cyberpunk 2020, the Neuromancer books, Blade Runner, and so on, there is a lot of Japanese cultural stylings that exist within this game, and you've continued that with a lot of the weapons within the game have that aspect.
Yeah.
You have the nunchaku, you've got the naginata, and the tetsubo, and tanto, and zanbato sword. And again, this is an ongoing aspect that just continues through the cyberpunk tradition. That things, it's every cyberpunk city you're in looks like Tokyo, and that's just fact. And if there's not enough neon, you're not doing it justice.
Exactly. Right.
And it's raining, and it's cold, and it's dark, and so these are just the aesthetics that I love, and about the cyberpunk type games, and if they're missing, it's the first thing I notice. It's just like, wait, it's a beautiful day. No. But again, it runs the variety with what they provide. But you've got the familiar things like razor claws and monowire whip, and some have special things to them, some don't in tradition. But the one thing about them is they do have RAM costs associated with them.
That is right.
So when you have these weapons, this is my understanding. So if I have a banhammer, it costs 2 RAM, and then that's just essentially it. So you don't necessarily need to spend RAM to use it. That's just RAM is associated with just with the weight that you're carrying, like you said.
You jack in. You've got certain amount of memory allocated to you in the system. What's inside?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So essentially, as you're pulling the stuff out, if your random access memory can't recall it for you, your memory's leaking, and therefore you can't do it. So you need to increase that level or find something within the game, and I think we'll give you some temporary extra RAM if I'm not incorrect. Yeah. Yes. So, but yeah, Screaming Skull, things such as that. It's definitely one of I'm an equipment guy, and I just love seeing interesting stuff. It's especially in a cyberpunk game. That's the first thing you go to, in my opinion. When a new cyberpunk style game comes out, you go to the equipment and say, okay, what are these weapons? What do they do? And how different are they? And how cool are they? Then we've got protective demons, which are your armor here. And again, they've got, they can be actual physical, or they can be firewall related. Support demons, drones, climbing kits, grappling guns, and so on. But then we have, aside from that, we've got unique daemons, datagrams. What are datagrams?
So every 0 level application has a specialty, like the packet sniffer and the dark web spider and all those things that we were talking about earlier. They each kind of have their own related special ability, if you will. They're basically in most cases, they're like a one-time set of data that you can use in order to boost a roll of some kind. Okay. So that could be an attack roll, that could be a skill roll. It doesn't matter. And then once it's used, it's kind of gone. And you could have RAM. You could use your RAM to have maybe extra datagrams alongside, so that you can continue to use them during the adventure. A DM should definitely be awarding like datagrams, maybe as with advanced functionality, additional functionality, or bigger pluses, let's say, to rolls as a reward, or of missions accomplished or treasure found or that kind of stuff. So it's just a little extra thing that's closely associated to like their starting, what kind of program they were before they became turned into or transformed, recoded into an avatar for a user. So that source code is still there, and some of its capabilities are still available.
Got it. Excellent. Yeah, I'm just looking at them, in matrix vision, things that people would find familiar.
Yeah.
Disk bloat. So you could tell that you obviously work, within an IT aspect.
Yes.
Job that, a lot of these things, it's just, if you're not in it, you wouldn't know about it. No. But if you are, you're like, oh yeah, this is security cert.
There's a bit of a love letter in here to my profession.
Yeah. Right. So we move on to combat. So I'm just going to read the combat overview here. Most games before the round, you check for surprise.
Yeah.
And based on the results, you roll for initiative, and then characters and the ice act in initiative order. And so you've got your standard, bit by bit here, but it's what's applied during combat that is different. You've got what is called connection warfare.
Yeah.
And it touches on a lot of different things like traceback, kicks, sharking, logging out. Now this is, again, for someone who's been playing, in cyberpunk games and is, associated with net running, some of these may ring a bell for you. But so maybe if you can just touch on a couple of those things, because those are different than I just roll my dice and stuff happens.
Right. In some ways, these are elements of like advanced combat sections of the SRD. So like wrestling or something like that, grappling or other kind of elements like that, kind of reskinned in certain ways. But then like really, applied specifically to the environment, right? Like the ability to like essentially track people or trace them back to wherever they are is going to be a networking thing. And so how do you facilitate that happening in the game? And I think one of my favorites is Hup Lock, which is hang up lock. Hup is this, another term from the biz. Yeah. And so it's a way to kind of like lock somebody into the net, like they can't get out. and that is in a way like grappling.
Right.
And kicks are just like straight out, getting kicked out of the environment.
Right.
And sharking is a way to attack somebody through the network somehow.
Oh, okay.
I think that there's an element that I still want to explore, which is in DCC they have spell dueling, and I think that there's an opportunity here to really lean into that as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean that pulls just right into the actual aspect of hacking.
Yeah.
It's a duality, especially if you're if you're working in system security and it's real time hacking. You are essentially dueling them to keep them from breaking through and gaining access. And there definitely is something there, not just in that, but in other aspects of it. But
red team, blue team stuff.
Yeah, they're definitely within the cyberpunk aspect of this game. There's constant things that would be able to reflect spell dueling to some regards, because it's a one-on-one thing. Whether it be programs fighting each other or physical people who are using their real-time skills to do certain things. It's just whoever gets those keystrokes in quicker. You may win the day.
Yeah.
So.
And the last thing I think in here is kind of like two concepts of damage, which is anti-personnel and anti-program damage.
Okay.
And anti-program damage is stuff that's happening inside the net, but anti-personnel is I've reached you at your home and I'm cooking your brain kind of stuff.
Right. Which is the biggest fear,
yes.
of any, any sort of story that deals with virtual reality or cyberpunk is, sure, I can be hurt within the game, but do I die in real life if I die in here? And if there's a yes, you're like, oh shit, got real.
Yes.
So that's always a big one, because you know, if I don't get hurt on the real world, I'm going in guns blazing.
Right.
But if there's consequences, then it's different. So, and just want to check in. I know we're at an hour and a half here, having a wonderful chat. But you know, I just want to make sure you're okay with time. We can wrap it up here shortly, but I'm just, you know, want to see how much I need to spend time on going through these things before you got to jam out. So.
I'm good for a little bit longer. This has been great.
Okay, good.
So far.
Okay, cool.
So.
Cool. Yeah, because I wanted to highlight some of the things that, you know, that I've looked at, and just make sure people get a good amount of detail, you know, to you know, go on drive through and pick this up. And no, that's not a suggestion. Go. Stop watching it and go buy it and come back.
Just pay what you want right now for the beta rules.
Okay. Well, we'll save that for like a personal chat. I don't want to air any dirty laundry, but I've got opinions about people who circumvent pay what you want on certain things. So we'll leave it at that. You know, I appreciate pay what you want, but I do kind of feel like, you know, regardless, you deserve something. Someone always deserves something for their effort.
I agree.
And I do feel like, you know, whenever someone says, "Oh, I didn't pay anything because I want to check it out, but if I like it, I'll come back and buy it."
Come back.
You never do.
Yes.
So you should feel bad.
You should feel bad.
So moving into the next aspect, you've got mod chips, which I think you touched on briefly earlier.
Yep.
These are certain things that are designed to, you know, you have active slots that you can, you know, fill these up, and these boost abilities, gives you pluses and minuses and other, you know, situations that they're applied to. And I think that's kind of in a nutshell, but the big thing about them is not what they are, but what they provide. And there is just, you know, a plethora of just different things here that just run the gamut of what they can do for you, and different tiers and whatnot.
Yes. And if you want like a rage machine, you can be a rage machine, right? If you want to be a monk, you can be a monk. Like that's what the chips do. And I think that's what really DCC is doing too, right? They're enabling that you to take a really simple and open and not very well-defined concept of the deed die and do whatever you want with it. This is always kind of, people maybe miss it in the story of DCC's Mighty Deeds. It's like, you can run a monk with that die, no problem.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and one of the things I do like about the deed die is, and things like that, is it gives people an opportunity to be creative.
Yeah.
I mean, there are kind of, hey, if you want to just use these things, go with it. But some of the more creative people who like to provide some color and flourish within reason, Noah. That's my son. Yeah, you know, can you imagine what, like, yeah, I want this to happen when I roll my D die. You're like, no. Your
first level, no way.
Exactly. It's like, you know, I want to catch the nuclear missile and toss it back at the dragon. Like,
I don't think.
First off, there's no nuclear missile. Anyways, I digress. But it does give an opportunity for people to kind of add that wonderful flourish into the game, and, you know, make it their own. But with the mod chips, that allows people like me, you know, when they're making their character, to do what everyone wants to do in a cyberpunk game, and just look at their friends and go, "Whoa, I know kung fu."
Exactly.
So you provided that opportunity for them here.
I have to. I'm going to go to this page, because when I did this, I was like, I was hoping that someone would know this. One of the spells in Kyridian is called mental. What's it called? Memory implant. And so at the bottom, I have no image for this, but I did just write out the words "I know kung fu" at the bottom of the page.
Nice. Oh, and for those who say they don't want to do that, you're lying. Everyone wants to have that moment in the sun.
Absolutely.
So I mean, various things. I mean, some of the names are like Burn and Punisher and Slasher and things such as that. You know, higher level ones, rare ones, and whatnot. So yeah, you can do what you do with any sort of mod chip. You can mod yourself to various degrees and see what the outcome is. So, dealing with aspects such of health, damage, and death, this obviously, again, is something that may be handled differently within this game because of the world you're living in. Healing is reflected within the maintenance rules, and those tend to be relatively standard as far as healing. Damage. Damage here is... You're not necessarily dead, but there's two aspects to it, right? Depending on the type of game you're playing. But at 0 level within the game, you de-res. But if you're dealing with ability losses and you're reduced to certain things like 0 wits, you become a babbling idiot. 0 psyche, catatonic, and so on. But essentially, it's still the same thing. But you reach civil level, boom, character done. But not necessarily, because you have a re-res aspect, right?
Yeah, this is
what is the re-res, and also you have a reboot aspect. What do those two provide?
So re-res is kind of like being able to stand up relatively quickly after being reduced to 0, and this is very much DCC style, right? Reduced to 0 rules is when you kind of start de-resing, you could be brought up. Right, brought back. If you fully go under, and this is rolling the body mechanic, that's what reboot is. And so if you the time has expired, right? Like you've been out de-resed for 3 rounds, let's say, and you're a 3rd level character, you have a good chance of being gone. But kind of a little reboot, and let's see if we can bring them back online. And so that's the roll the body mechanic.
Excellent. And then, unfortunately, de-resolution.
Yes.
That's get you a new sheet. And by the way, the character sheets you provide with the beta version, they're excellent.
Oh, man.
Full color.
Full color, beautiful. Colin Richards pumped those out for me, and then I did an amber screen version and a green screen version.
Nice. Okay, so we've got one of the major aspects of the game here and it's not, the rules aren't huge, but you actually have hacking, which is an aspect of the grifter and the cyphomorph. And I believe you touched on that earlier, right?
During the character classes.
But you do have hacking result tables. Again, DCC games, you got to have your tables, and I would be remiss if they weren't there, but you get past the 2 to 11 sweet spot and good stuff starts to happen. And what I'd like to do is, if you don't mind, my eyes immediately pass over everything and goes right to the 32 plus.
Yes.
What happens if I do anything? So for this one, the world net shudders and quakes around the target, causing 8d12 plus caster level damage. Large mundane objects such as walls, data spires, and node points automatically shatter as above unless they make a DC 24 fortification save. Unlike demons, daemons can also be destroyed if the hacking check exceeds the program check used to create the daemon.
It's magic weapons.
And a minimum permanent personality expenditure of 1 point per daemon's modifier. If successful, the daemon explodes in a blast of pixelated light, gradually dimming into the world net, inflicting 3d12 points of damage to everything within 30 plus. Yes. that is this kind of that is the stuff of magic right there. That is the stuff where, if you, I mean, obviously at a con game, that's a lot of people's that they're just like, I've just got to make it to the end.
No one's done it yet.
Oh yeah,
all these not a lot of playtests, but some playtests, and nobody's hacked anything yet, and that's making me very sad.
I know, I've seen that at many a table, at the cons I've been to, where and these are seasoned DCC players, and you're just you're waiting for the moment you get to the end with the big bad guy, and they're like, I cast this. I'm like, aren't you going to spell burn? Like, I don't know if I should. And I'm just like, I'm like, it's a con game.
Go for it.
Do it. Yeah. Okay, so then we go into you give a very wonderfully detailed aspect to adventure building within the game.
Yeah.
And you the terminology that you use for them is arcologies, and once again, I think this is one of the things where if you want to touch upon anything, that would be great. But these are part of the rules where I think people need to sit down and take a bit of time and read to fully grasp what you provided for them, and these particular adventures that and these tools that they can use to create these adventures that make it that virtual reality cyberpunk aesthetic exclusive towards this game and different from other things. Yep.
Yeah, so the arcology is really a way to kind of reason about a system. Like if you think about today and all around you, every website you're using, every app on your phone has its own system, right? Of computation, of various elements that make up that application. And the developers who make it, right? And the degree to which they put their craft into it and test what they have what you're using. And I wanted to make something that most people will never think about, A, gameable, and B, understandable, right?
Right.
Because this is like, I can make a game, quote unquote computer game, and it can be very much like programming, and no one is going to be able to understand what the hell I'm talking about.
Right. Yeah.
So the challenge is to put something to make you think about it, and then just give you some ways to test it out, right? To roll some tables, roll on a table and see what kind of comes out. And so the arcologies are really just like, what does this system look like? This application, whatever it is, right? It doesn't matter. You're like basically in a dungeon or in a big cyber city virtual reality or whatever. And each individual inside the city is maintaining their own building or their own edifice or arcology. And so to what degree is it like the solidity of the programming, the quality of the programming, and what is it trying to do, and what is its like aesthetics? And so I kind of boil it down into like those three things, which is the tone and the theme and the functionality. And there's some tables. They're not necessarily in this beta. They're on the Patreon. And it's just a way to kind of like do some generation tables, right? To get you start thinking about how to build a system or how to, like some creative, like, starting points, right? Of how the system is going to play in the game. When they come to that system that they're trying to get some information from, what does it look like? How well is it programmed? What is it really trying to do? And so there's all these kinds of things like, and so like tone is like the why was it made? How detailed is it? What are its operations and interactions? And the theme is kind of how it looks. And the functionalities could be just like the amount of things it does, or how crappy it is, or how great it is coded.
Yes.
Right. So it could be really buggy or abandoned or vaporware or a beta, or it could just be like, a well-formed, well-working system. So it's just a way to kind of get you to start thinking about what might be inside when they finally do breach the system and they are trying to get to their goal inside of that thing. Because I think it could be really hard for people to like imagine what a system is and to what degree it operates at.
It is, if you're not familiar with all of the tropes and movies and whatnot that you and I and other people are familiar with, and to just not make it feel like it's just our world but different. It's when you log on to World of Warcraft, it's a living, breathing world, but it's different. It's not our own. I think most recently I would say that what you're talking about, right? So in the current iteration of Cyberpunk game, hacking literally is just, I'm just in an elevator, I'm going up, I'm walking into a room, I'm doing something, and I'm leaving. There's really nothing else besides that. I mean, if you're a creative GM, you want to do something more, you can, but that's the basis of the game. The Cyberpunk Red video game, though, when they start moving you into the aspects of net running, into their version of the net or the web, it is more so what you're trying to show here. It is a living, breathing world. There's a physicality to it. And also, as you progress through this game, depending on where you go, there's degradation within there. Like the program is not holding itself together. So, so you'll see various aspects of it disappear or not be there. And it's there's that. And of course there's, the Tron version of it, where they don't really, obviously there's a tone and a feel and definitely an aesthetic to it, but it's different. Or you can go with the Lawnmower Man aspect and have everyone just run away, because those special effects are horrible and don't hold up. But still, c'est la vie. But yeah, so it's, but getting people to go, well, what do you mean? It's because some people may say, well, it's just reality, right? Whereas other people who've been playing online games or dealing with the stuff, even of the generation like my son, who is not familiar with Neuromancer or the older version of Cyberpunk, obviously they're familiar with the Cyberpunk video game, which has brought him into playing Cyberpunk itself also. But they've also said it's different. They said, there's a big difference between the role-playing game and the video game, but the one thing the video game does is, if you just disregard the aspect that the functioning rules for that universe are different than the role-playing game, the visual aspects of it allowed them to envision the game, and likewise things within the network easier, which was a plus. And they
leaned into it for Cyberpunk Red. I mean, I feel like the two really play off each other in a certain respect.
They do. There's it is definitely different. And a little sidebar here, I know that they're supposed to be coming out with a Cyberpunk Red box set for the tabletop RPG. I'm going to be really interested on, is it just a setting, or they are trying to manipulate some of the rules from the video game into the role-playing game, and how they're going to do that, because the video game and an RPG would just break the RPG, in my opinion, and in certain aspects just aren't the same. But so this is me doing an interview. I digress. I'm sorry, so you carry on through there, and you touch on aspects of not only that, but also dealing with artificial intelligence within the game, which is more prevalent today than it was back then, although still the fear and the aspect of it hasn't changed. Back then, when they really wasn't nothing more than an imaginary thing, the master computer program was an entity with aspirations and emotions and things, and well, this is never going to happen. And then moving into things like Terminator and now today, so
maybe.
And then you also provide the bestiary within there, essentially, ICE, which stands for intrusion countermeasures, electronic
entities, actually, in this case.
Entities. Okay, sorry, electronic entities.
Yes.
Anyways,
all the same.
So okay. Oh, I found a typo. You might want to fix
it. Typos.
Yeah, the acronym coined as ICE stands for Intrusion Countermeasures Electronic, page 64.
Yes. Well, and then it's an invention by Tom Maddox and popularized, but it never caught on in computer science.
Yeah.
And so I'm telling you that I'm changing the acronym to.
Oh, got it.
Countermeasure entity.
Got it. Perfect. So excellent. My bad.
No worries.
I'm not familiar with the background. So essentially these are things created within the world itself, to, help or possibly hinder you, or provide other aspects within the game, just like any good bestiary, does.
Looks like there's 20 of them, if I counted correctly.
Yeah. Yeah, we have anything from, an eye monitor, knight errant, tentacle drone, onwards to things like nanite. And you've got your hellhound, which is, something that is, again, you,
Yes.
you, you need to have some sort of hellish type hound. Um, Data lake monster.
Yes.
Yeah. So the bestiary, again, you've been very generous with providing the bestiary with a wonderful bestiary for the for this beta. And then finally, you also do what a lot of people really wouldn't do in a beta is you do have a little mini adventure.
Yeah. Quick.
That if yeah.
It's about an hour, maybe two, depending on how much the players screw around. But really just a simple kind of puzzle and some combat and some danger.
Which is what more can you ask for in any to get a general idea of an RPG? People say if you want to get an idea, always do character creation, and then and this may be obvious to others, but let's go one step further. Let's take this character and let's throw them into combat or something like that, or let's provide some sort of problem for them to solve, because that way you'll get a general idea from just character creation, but you're not familiar with the rules. Let's do something before we jump in feet first, and I'm not here flipping through the book going, Jesus, I don't know. And everything grinds to a halt for 5 minutes. The Core Queen Slumbers is the name of that adventure. So that concludes the beta, which is a nice, neat 86 pages currently, and it is, in my opinion, a fantastic way to role play and play within an area that isn't treaded much into as much anymore, that virtual world. But it also, again, I said this earlier, but the one thing I love about it is it doesn't need to be permanent. It could just be a sidebar to your game. Go out, have an adventure within this wonderful realm that you have with these tools that are provided, and everyone gets to join in the net hacking fun. And then when everything's done, if you want to go back, you can. Otherwise, exist and play within this world as long as you want, and just don't get derez. But an excellent job, my friend. This is something that I was excited to finally get you on here to talk with you about it and get a little bit of insight and show people what you've done here with this, because I feel it is definitely a different take than a lot of the cyberpunk stuff that has been coming out as of late. I mean, obviously with Cyberpunk Red and Cyborg, and it seems like every other week there's some other version of some sort of cybernetic game, and that's fantastic. But as well as anyone else that if you want your game to stand out, there's got to be something to it that are going to draw people in and fight and want to play it. And in my opinion, you've done that here. So excellent job.
I appreciate that.
You should be proud of it.
Yeah, this has been I like you. I'm always looking at these games. I'm always like, are they going to do net stuff or not? And they don't. I mean, it's enough just to do one game, right? Yeah. And then just to do another one on top of that, like inside of the net. I just couldn't even imagine it, which is like why I ultimately was kind of like, I bought in, right, that I was going to make the RPG. Is like, well, there aren't too many of these. I think I've found one since then, since I started, where it's just strictly a networking, adventure. And it's a cipher system game. It's Monty Cook's kind of foray into that topic. But I haven't found anything else that will dive as deep into it as a real RPG experience as
right.
A standalone game, right? Nobody's doing it. So,
well, the closest one, and it doesn't even come close, but Cyberpunk Red has that Elf Lines, MMORPG MMO.
Right.
So I
are they just trying to get Shadowrun money?
I don't know. My son, we got the PDF and I showed it to him. I'm like, what do you think about this? He's like, so I'm role playing as my character in Cyberpunk, and all we're doing is logging in and we're playing an MMO in there. Why? I'm just like, I don't know. He's like,
so meta.
I'm just like, but I'm like, what do you do? It's like whatever you would do if you were on World of Warcraft. And his whole thing was, and I didn't go too deep, and I know they've done a bit more with it, but it wasn't my jam. So I'm just like, I guess you just play, and like, okay, and then what happens? What about our characters? It's like, oh, you're just sitting at a computer, you're jacked into something,
right?
It's like, but can't I just play D&D or DCC and do fun stuff in Cyberpunk? I'm like, you can. He's like, I don't get this. I'm like, don't worry, son. My ear's bleeding too.
Yeah.
The hemorrhaging will stop soon. But it's a concept. It's a bold thing. Again, it's probably someone that looked at it and went, yes, finally. But it's still not really what you've provided here. There's an actual reason to go do this if you wanted to. James, anything else you would like to add regarding your game?
It's going to crowdfund in the fall of this year, 2024. I'm not sure I'm going to do BackerKit or if I'm going to do Kickstarter, but it's going to be on crowdfunding. Okay. I'm excited to have it, get to this stage. I'm excited to start talking about it and sharing it with people. There's a Patreon if you want to get closer to the project and follow monthly what's happening. There's a Facebook page too if you don't want to follow along on Patreon. And so I'm just really I'm looking forward to all of the future conversations I'm going to have. Not just with you, but with everybody else around this game.
Yeah. Hopefully the next person you talk to won't take up 2 hours of your time.
I love using 2 hours of my time talking about this.
Oh, excellent. I sometimes feel, and I get this a lot, you babble, not just from people online, but even every once in a while I'll finish recording and my wife will be like, you took up so much time of that very nice, man or woman's time to talk about something, and all they're doing is you're there to talk about them, but they're listening to you talk. I'm like, I'm sorry. It's like, do better. But in the future, I should include like a disclaimer. It's like 2 hours minimum. It may close early, but just make sure you
there you go. Time. Well, you said it's thoroughly unprofessional or whatever. So
exactly. Exactly. I've seen people pop on and talk about, a game like, Conan 2D20. They're like, yeah, let's talk about Conan 2D20. And it's like, it's 20 minutes. I'm like, how do they do that? But anywho, thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on here and talk about your game, and also just, talk about you personally, and also by default, discussions about, gaming and game design.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people out there, definitely want to hear people talk about that, be they an aspiring game designer or just, enjoy these type of discussions, learn more about how the hobby works and whatnot. And definitely, I'll be providing, in the description within the video, there'll definitely be the links to everything, your Patreon, the Facebook link, and anything else on there. And so it'll be very easy for you to find James and the work that he's doing with Netcrawl. But that aside, before we conclude, I got to ask, are you going to be at Gen Con this year?
I will be there. Absolutely. Oh. I'll be running Netcrawl, and I'll be running the Xcrawl tournament, helping run the Xcrawl tournament for DCC.
Excellent. Well, hopefully you'll see mine and my son's names at one of your tables.
I should hope so.
That's I'm looking forward to that. And if not, this time around I'm more comfortable. Because, the first time, you're just like, I don't know what's going on. I walked by so many people. I was real quick, people, just chill. We're almost done. Real quick, I was walking towards the bathroom in Lucas Oil Stadium, and I passed by somebody, who kind of just passed me by. And as this person passed, I hear someone shout, Titter Pigs, which is the podcast I do with my friend Keith. And I turn around, I'm like, who? And it was Harley Stroh. And I'm like,
they know you.
I'm like, you know who I am? He's like, oh, well, you had Titter Pigs on your shirt. I'm like, oh, okay, shit. I'm like, oh, good to meet you. Blah 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 blah. So yeah, it was nice, but just the fact I'm just like. Where did that voice? Because there's hundreds of people in there. I'm like, who's shouting this?
Right.
So, but anyways, thank you so much. I do appreciate you definitely taking the time on here once again. And everyone, this has been yet another completely unprofessional interview. If you like what you see here, definitely, subscribe, like button, bell, blah, 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 however that script goes. And definitely check out the podcast that I do with my friend Keith. You can just do a search for Titter Pigs. And we have a new episode hopefully coming up soon. And also, go to the description and check out what James is doing. And there'll also be a link to your previous work, which you can find very easily on a variety of sites. So, James, thank you once again for a third time for coming on.
Thanks.
And we'll definitely look forward to the success that will be Netcrawl. And I look forward to seeing you at Gen Con.
Absolutely. Looking forward myself.
All right.
Thanks so much for having me on.
You're welcome. Take care, everyone.